Hi there, I'm Jodie and I'm an autistic speech and language therapist, for those of you that don't know me on here. Now, I was speaking at the ASLTIP conference yesterday and I was asked to talk about a time when I felt like I belonged or didn't belong, and what that's actually taught me about how belonging works in the profession. Now, I had 2 minutes, which is not enough time at all to do this justice, but I wanted to share some of my thoughts with you because I think it's really a really important topic, because in our neurodivergent SLT network we have about 450 members now, and we ran a couple of polls a couple of years ago that were asking people if they felt like they fitted in to where they work and if they'd had to leave a job because they didn't feel that sense of belonging. Now, we did not expect that 89% were going to say, yes, that's me. Now, it's really concerned me. I'm very worried about it. And the more people I talk to, the more I realise that it's not just neurodivergent speech and language therapists, it's speech and language therapists of colour. Even men don't always feel like they belong, because as you know, we now have about 5% of the profession who are males, but there's something in the culture of our profession that's making people feel like it's not safe to be myself. Like, who I aspire to be as a speech and language therapist is not, I'm not seeing those who are represented, who are like me, who are free to be themselves. So this is kind of what's led me to the research that I'm doing. So in my study, I'm not really doing any representative work. I'm doing much deeper investigation, I suppose, inquiry into what's going on, because in my study I'm treating the neurodivergent SLT as a phenomenon that is co-created by both human and non-human factors. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're no longer asking questions about facilitators and barriers, or conditions for thriving, or even how can we get your support right. Now, I'm not saying that any of those things are bad ways to study things, but there's actually much more going on, because when we wrote the guidelines last year, I thought for quite some time that if we just get people's reasonable adjustments right, and then maybe we could thrive at work. But actually, in reality, people are finding they're feeling even more marginalised after they've had adjustments put in. So there's definitely something else that's going on that's much deeper, and that's kind of what I wanted to look at in my research. So when you see the ND SLT as a phenomenon, you're actually stripping it right back to the very basics, like who decides what even counts as professional? Who decides what it means to be an SLT? Whose clinical knowing is privileged, silenced, included or excluded in the way that we practice as SLTs? How does the profession's long history of identifying, categorising and treating disorder continue to influence how neurodivergent practitioners are both perceived and even how they perceive themselves? The trouble is, when neurodivergence is positioned as disorder, some geek up there, when neurodivergence is positioned as a deficit, through a deficit lens, through the medical model, the only question that you can ask is, what support do you need to do this job in this way? So then what happens is belonging actually becomes conditional, and it must be earned by performing in a very specific way. So I can be an outside the box thinker, apparently, except I can't, because I can be outside the box, but I have to do it within the boundaries of the box that we have, within the realms of what somebody else thinks is possible. So when we see the neurodivergent SLT as a phenomenon, then we can actually start to ask different kinds of questions, and we can come to it from a position of wonder and curiosity. I wonder, another noisy train, I wonder if the neurodivergent intuition could open up new possibilities of clinical knowing. I wonder how a team of neurodivergent SLTs would redesign services if they could start again from scratch. I wonder why neurodivergent SLTs find it so hard to articulate their intuition. I wonder why I've made an assumption that the neurodivergent SLT must be lacking something rather than having been silenced, because when they did try to articulate their intuition, they were told this is not part of an SLT's role. So then I actually start to wonder whether belonging is more about acceptance. And I'm not talking about the type of acceptance like we tolerate you being here, or the type of acceptance that says we recognise that you have a different way of seeing things and we are going to let you practice in that way, and we'll turn a blind eye to the fact that when you do articulate it is a little bit maybe not quite part of the scope of practice? Or do we actually start to accept that the way that neurodivergent perspectives and our lens and our clinical knowing, whether that could actually bring something new to speech and language therapy, that it will help us to see things in a completely different way if we actually allow those therapists to move outside of the box and for us as a profession to move with them. So those are my thoughts. It's quite a big ask, actually. I'm asking, what am I asking? I think I'm saying that I think the shape of speech and language therapy needs to change. It's a big ask. Thank you for listening.